Yeah, I'll react to that, sure. Hey guys, I was asked a few days ago to watch this. Happy to do that. Love TLDR News EU. I know next to nothing about I know nothing about Belgian politics. Not next to nothing. Absolutely nothing. But I'm ready to learn for sure. Would love for you guys to, as you always do, help me out in the comments when I inevitably have questions here.
This video is brought to you by Ground News. Europe has a whole load of secessionist movements that are seeking to redraw the map, whether it's Catalonia, Corsica, Scotland, or Northern Ireland. And the same is true of Belgium, where the separatist Vlaams Belang, or Flemish Interest Party, often described as far right, is topping the polls in Flanders ahead of elections in June. The party's rise prompts a few obvious questions. Do Flemish people really want to form an independent country? And is Belgium really at risk of splitting apart? In this video, we're going to dig into exactly those questions, explain the party's growth, and look at what it means for Belgium.
Love Belgium architecture. All of this style of architecture in Northern Europe. Actually, you can even include places like Poland. Baltic Sea. Northwestern Europe. I love the architecture. And Belgium, I think it was Bruges. I went to, it was beautiful. I felt like I was transported back in time. So, what was I going to... I paused this for a reason, and I had to go on about architecture. Oh, yeah. I'm assuming it's going to be along language, cultural lines, because Belgium has French, Dutch, and German speakers.
Going forward.
Right.
Before we start, if you haven't already, please consider subscribing and ringing the bell to stay in the loop and be notified when we release new videos. First things first, we're going to briefly try and explain the Belgian political system. And bear with us, because it's not a simple task. Belgium is a federal state, split into 3 separate regions. These are the Flemish region, or Flanders, which is primarily Dutch-speaking, the Walloon region, or Wallonia, which is primarily French-speaking, but has a small German-speaking minority in the east, and finally the Brussels capital region, which is bilingual in French and Dutch. At the federal level, you've got the federal government.
What do people in Luxembourg speak? French? German? Luxembourgish, which I'm sure isn't a language, unless it is.
And Parliament, French and Dutch. At the federal level, you've got the federal government and Parliament, which deal with the kinds of things you'd expect a federal government would deal with. Then each of the 3 regions also have their own governments and parliaments, which have power connected with their territory. Things like the economy, housing, employment, agriculture, and so on. To make things more complicated, Belgium also has 3 communities, the Flemish, French-speaking, and German-speaking. These also have their own governments and parliaments, which deal with things like education, language, culture, and so on. So when we say
Guys, I don't want to assume that just because they speak the language, maybe they look more kindly on the Dutch or on the French. Is there any sort of, I don't want to word that. I have a question, but it could come across wrong because I'm like, I'm insinuating that Belgium would want to not be a country anymore. But it's a serious question I have. So, is there any wish for like this area to join Netherlands and this area to join France and this area to join Germany, or no? Is that? I'm sorry if that's a dumb question. I had to ask.
And German speaking. These also have their own governments and parliaments, which deal with things like education, language, culture, and so on. So when we say Belgium is holding elections on the 9th of June, there's a whole lot happening. Across Belgium, which has mandatory voting, there will be the federal election, the Flemish Parliament, Walloon Parliament, and Brussels Parliament elections, the German-speaking Community Parliament election, and also the European parliamentary elections. So now that's out the way, let's zero in on Flanders. There's long been a Flemish nationalist movement, and these days advocates of independence point to the socio-economic, political and cultural divides between Flanders and Wallonia. and argue that unshackling Flanders, the wealthier region, from the rest of Belgium would free it from the at times dysfunctional nature of the country's politics. There are two main parties representing the movement. First, you've got the New Flemish Alliance, or NVA, a right-wing party that doesn't actually call for secession, but instead advocates for what it calls confederalism. They've been the largest party in both the Flemish and federal parliaments for more than a decade now, currently governing Flanders in a coalition and remaining in opposition at the federal level. But further to the right, often labelled far right, is Flemish Interest, or VB, who do advocate for full independence and who currently are the third largest party at the federal level and second largest in Flanders. Since the last election in 2019, polling has pretty consistently put them in first place, and as things stand, they would likely become the largest party in Flanders and at the federal level too. Though remember that in Belgium, largest parties fall well below the majority threshold, so it's all about forming coalitions.
Wait, what's the population split like between these territories? Between these areas?
Well below the majority threshold, so it's all about forming coalitions, and we'll come back onto this later. So does this mean that the people of Flanders are actually itching for independence? Well, not really. The most recent poll puts the Flemish Interest Party at around a record high, 27.4% of the federal vote in Flanders. Combined with the New Flemish Alliance's 20.4%, that gives the Flemish Nationalist Party's 47.8%. But remember that the latter of those two parties isn't actually pushing for independence. In fact, even the 27.4% for Flemish Interest is not representative of support for independence. The slightly more boring but still important reality is that, as is the case in many countries across Europe, the party's rise can largely be attributed to the dominance of migration as a political issue, with the populist Flemish Interest Party picking up support for its hardline immigration views as well as its anti-establishment position. In fact, one recent poll found that for voters in Flanders, just 4% considered the structure of the state to be the most important.
Wow, top issue. Migration's been a big issue. It is a big issue in this election cycle over here as well. So interesting how even in separate continents, countries are, either immigration is a real problem or is, well, I guess that's the only
issue, while a plurality, answer, or 22%, said migration and 20% said the economy. The real consequence of a strong showing by Flemish Interest at the election is that it'll put Belgium on course for another long and difficult government formation period at the federal level, but also in Flanders too. Now, it's here that the comparison to other European countries comes in useful again. Across the border in the Netherlands, government formation talks are still dragging on following an election win by the far right. Additionally, like with the Sweden Democrats in Sweden, the AfD in Germany and so on, there exists an anti-far-right cordon sanitaire around the Flemish Interest Party, as the other parties reject working with them at any level of government.
I need to get better with European political parties. Just if only just the big significant ones, or the more extreme versus the more moderate ones, extreme either side, left, right. But so many buzzwords, so many phrases in the names of political parties in Europe are kind of buzzwords over here that you associate with one party. And so saying the Swedish Democrats are the more right wing or whatever, it's just wait, what? And so I'm still stuck with the standards of the stereotypes of American political. How do I say this? The stereotypes of each American political term, and then my brain automatically applies that logic to European parties when it's not logical to do that. I could have explained that so much better than I just did.
Again, as the other parties reject working with them at any level of government. Again, as is the case in other European countries, there is an open question as to whether the cordon sanitaire will hold after the election. And that is mainly a question for the New Flemish Alliance, whose leader has hinted that his party could go into regional Flemish government with Flemish Interest. The difficulty for the new Flemish alliance, though, is that if they do form such a coalition in Flanders, it would not only create some splits within the party, it also effectively rules them out of any federal government coalition, as the other parties say they would not work with new Flemish alliance if it, in turn, works with Flemish interest. All in all, this outcome would probably just result in Belgium ending up with a federal government that is the same or looks similar to its incumbent so-called Vivaldi coalition, named in reference to Vivaldi's Four Seasons, because of the four political groups present in the coalition: centre-right Liberals, Socialists, Greens and Christian Democrats. Now, it's worth saying that there's other reasons why government formation...
Like Christian Democrat, that phrase doesn't work in my head. It's like if you said, if America had, it's like, all right, we're a new party, what do you call it? We're the Christian Democrats. I'm like, okay, either you're trying to like, what are your policies? What? So, God dang it, I need to get better at this.
Present in the coalition: centre-right Liberals, Socialists, Greens and Christian Democrats. Now, it's worth saying that there's other reasons why government formation, at all different levels, could prove difficult, besides the rise of Flemish interest and the expected decline in seats for the governing parties. Also expected to make gains is the Workers' Party of Belgium, a Marxist party, relatively unique in that it's a fully national party, i.e. it stands in all regions, while other parties are from either Wallonia or Flanders, and usually have a counterpart in the opposite region. Anyway, polls suggest the Workers' Party will make gains on their 2019 result, and could even win in Brussels, complicating coalition negotiations across the country.
Never mind, I was going to say something, but never mind. I should.
Anyway, polls suggest the Workers' Party will make gains on their 2019 result, and could even win in Brussels, complicating coalition negotiations across the country. But long negotiations are nothing new for Belgium. Following the last election in 2019, it took 494 days before a government was formed, and after the 2010 election, it took a record 541 days. So it will take a lot for that record to be broken this time around. When researching a contentious topic like independence, we found that it was really important to balance the different opinions on this topic. Fortunately, we were able to easily compare opinions thanks to our sponsor,
Unfortunately,
Ground News,
something like this isn't a bad idea.
Developed by a former NASA engineer on a mission to give readers an easy...
If you're interested, guys, great video. Obviously, I'm going to play through this. And if you're interested here, you continue to watch and you like this and want to get it, just make sure to use any promo codes and links from TLDR EU's.
Data-driven, objective way to read the news. Every story comes with a quick visual breakdown of the political bias, factuality, and ownership of the sources reporting.
One more question. What do you... I can be persuaded, but mandatory voting is a strange concept to me. It's like, all right, you want to get the opinion of every single person in your country to see what everyone really wants. I get that. But if you don't want to vote, and you're not going to like complain about the result and you just don't want to vote, what's so harmful with that? I guess it might make it so that you can't, like, if this is the reason, then I can sort of see it. To like make sure that voter suppression or anti-voting tactics can't be utilized to try and persuade people not to go to the polls. I guess that's sort of a good idea, but I think at the end of the day, if it's a democracy, voting should be a right, not a obligation. Maybe I'm wrong here. I don't know, but I'm curious what you guys think.
All backed by ratings from 3 independent news monitoring organizations. For example, take this story about Russia's claim that NATO states like Belgium have their military spending dictated by the US. Right away, you can see that the story had 11 outlets reporting on it. Of these 11 outlets, only 10% lean left, while 60% lean right. Every story also comes with a detailed view of the bias distribution, factuality scores, and even specific ownership information. You can also swipe through some of the headlines to get a more detailed understanding of how reporting might change based on political bias. I especially like their blind spot feed, which shows you stories underreported by either side of the political spectrum. Ground News is
That is telling. That is a great feature. That is very telling. Because parties often want to, and I hate this about politics, I guess it's impossible to get rid of, but that politics are treated like sports in that it's not like, and same with news, like it's usually in promotion of politics, unfortunately, some less than others, but you don't have to lie to be misleading. You know, if the news is so applicable to your own standards and preferences, that if you're a news station, there is so much that you can cover that you can come up with an excuse and say, well, why didn't you cover this? Oh, well, I was covering other stuff. And this would be very helpful to see both sides' hesitancies.
It shows you stories underreported by either side of the political spectrum. Ground News is such a useful tool for our current media landscape, and I cannot recommend it enough. I've become much better at spotting political bias, and I've surprisingly challenged some of my own views. In fact, if you subscribe today, you'll get 40% off their Vantage plan.
TLDR.
That's $5 a month for unlimited access to every incredible Ground News feature. This offer is only available here, so make sure you go to ground.news/TLDR or click the link in the description to get started and support an independent news platform working to make the media landscape more transparent.
Love it. TLDR means too long didn't read, right? It's basically like, here's the summary for people who don't want to. Very interesting. As you can tell, I don't know very much about European politics, Belgian politics, and I would appreciate any answers to my questions, any comments at all. Really appreciate it. Appreciate it. You guys are always awesome with that. Love y'all. Can't wait to see you guys next video. Bye, guys.